Hi, everybody. Jen Hatmaker here, your host of the For the Love podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. Um, I just this very second finished today's interview, and I can say this sincerely. Like, I interview a lot of therapists and mental health specialists and wellness experts kind of across the spectrum. And today's conversation, you can't see me if you're just listening to me, but here's my notes. I took a bunch of notes in the middle because I did not want to forget a single thing. Gosh, she really like challenged me and pushed me and asked such pointed, specific questions as any of us are navigating kind of our own healing. A few of them stopped me in my tracks. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I think I just want you to know that I'm really excited for you to be here today. And I think this conversation is really going to serve you. Our guest is just she's just special and she's gifted. And I love the way that she is leading. And I was just really drawn to this conversation. We have the absolutely incredible Campbell here with us today. So Kobe is an award-winning licensed trauma therapist. She's an author. She's a speaker. She's written a book called Why Am I Like This? And the subtitle really gets to the core of it: How to Break Cycles, Heal from Trauma, and Restore Your Faith. I'm telling you, this is her deal. And so as we got into this conversation today, like we were unraveling I asked her, what even is trauma? How is trauma different than just pain? So she gets right to the heart of that. She talks, every time I said something, she would push back on it in a more generous reading than the way I self-described. She had more grace inside her answer. She had more nuance and thoughtfulness. And I just kept thinking, oh man, I have some bad narratives that I am still subscribing to. She's got a way that feels comforting and gentle and nurturing and also challenging. You're going to see this. You're going to see this today. So whatever you are bringing to the table right now, whatever trauma, frankly, that you are facing or dealing with, whatever old narrative you are still working to unspool, if there is some pattern or behavior that you think, why do I keep doing this? Like, I don't even want to be like this. This is your conversation. I think you're going to be encouraged today and challenged. And so I just am delighted, really, to bring you this really incredible conversation with the wonderful Campbell. Kobe, welcome to the show. I am just delighted to meet you. I have 1,000 things to say, and they're all competing to get started. I'm like, Jen, save it for the interview. But I just admire you, and I really love what it is you do. I'm so happy that you're here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here as well.
So I know that you have, well, you know what? First of all, let me just ask you this before we get into, because I've got all these questions around what it is that your expertise is in the world. But can you just tell my listeners a little bit about you first? This is who you are, and this is where you are, and these are your people, and this is your deal.
Yes. I'm Campbell. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I'm a mom of 2. I'm a wife, and I really like helping people heal. I specialize in trauma and specialize really in emotional trauma and recovering from the emotional effects of a trauma, the self-esteem effects, the relationship effects of the trauma. I'm sure we'll get into this more, but I love to tell people that trauma is not what happened to you. It's about how it affected you. And those effects can live in our present, even if the moment's in the past. And so I help people parse through that in creative ways with poems and quick words and thoughts from my kitchen right after I'm done with the session. So yeah.
Yeah, the writer in me loves that. I am one of those people who struggle to self-assess and to be, I don't have a quiet mind. I struggle to be introspective. Um, and I so often find my feelings by writing them. I wasn't sure what they were until the pen hit the page. And so you do a lot of writing prompts on your socials, and I love them. I am telling you, I read those and then I sit there and think, oh my God, like you usually will give like an open-ended finish this sentence. And all of a sudden, just like that, like you've unlocked something for me that I haven't even really thought of or considered or remembered in a long time. And I love that you give your people various entry points to find their healing, that being
Yeah.
one of them.
Yes, I love to make it plug and play because I think that like screaming at people to heal does not teach them anything. It's like saying like engineer a bridge. And it's like I literally do not even know what the first step is to engineering a bridge is. And I think that that's what a lot of people feel about their healing journey is like they want to do it. They just don't know where to start. So I like to help people figure out how to start.
So true, particularly around trauma, which is your specialty. Um, and so I just want to jump straight to it because the book that you've written and all that you delve into there is useful for almost every adult that I know. And so I am curious, what patterns um, or like repeated behaviors were leaping out to you, perhaps in the work that you do, that prompted you to write a book called Why Am I Like This? You must have been seeing something with your clients, with your patients, and I'm curious what it was that you were seeing.
Yes, I think that I realized that people could not connect their past experiences to their everyday patterns. And like, because this is my work, I could see it. I was like, oh, like that thing you said that doesn't hurt. No, maybe it's not causing you to break down, but it's causing you to engage in this pattern that you hate and you can't stop, which is like one of the things that I help, the questions and the prompts that I provide to clients when I'm helping them figure out like, oftentimes I know what their trauma is, but I'm like, it's better if you find out yourself and I don't just tell you like, hey, you dealt with abandonment or you deal with this. I asked them, okay, like what is a pattern that you have that you desperately want to stop, but you just can't? That like by all logical means, you should be able to just stop today, right now. But like for whatever reason, you can't stop. And then the second question is, if you never got to do or engage and partake in that pattern again for the rest of your life, what emotion would you have to get acquainted with?
Whoa, that gave me goosebumps. Whoa. That's pretty deep waters. I mean, if those are the two questions you ask, that session is worth every penny. Um, can you give an example? Like, what's, for example, you're obviously not speaking about somebody specific, but maybe you are. But this is an example of an early trauma that creates this pattern that sometimes is hard to connect to each other.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that one that I see that is common, so it's not just a person, but like just common for, I guess, this generation is like feeling like I have to earn love, right? And so the traumatic moment, trauma can be acute, meaning it can be a moment, or trauma can be chronic, meaning it could be several moments over time. And I like to give the example of like trauma can be a boulder or it could be pebbles. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. There is no big T trauma and little T trauma because at the end of the day, all those pebbles amass to the size of a boulder anyways. You know, it's just being accumulated over time. And so maybe the chronic trauma is like you only really got connection from your parents when you like exceeded at something, when you won an award. Like second place was never good enough. Like if you won first place, then your parents took you out to eat and spent time with you and bragged about how much they loved you. But if you got anything other than first, like they just didn't care or they didn't want to spend time with you and dwell with you, right? let's say that happens over 10, 15, 20 years, and then you become an adult who never ever really wants to connect with people because you feel like if I can't give them my best, I'm not worthy of existing in this relationship. And so, how I earn love in this friendship, in this sisterhood, in this brotherhood, whatever it is, in my small group of the people I'm trying to connect with, I earn love by being perfect. I earn love by being the best. I earn love by being excellent. And if I can't be excellent, then it's not worth connecting with other people or showing other people because I'll be rejected, right? So you're living out the narratives of the past in the present, but you don't realize that. You might just say to yourself, I'm a little bit of a loner, or I isolate sometimes, or I wish I could connect with people. I just don't know how to. And so my job is to help them to see the past, the present, and how they connect in the middle.
Well, let me ask you a high level question. Um, I- I'm so glad that mental health is now a very centered conversation. I mean, when I was growing up, this we didn't talk about any of this. Like, we didn't have language for this. Nobody was talking about this. We weren't raised like this. Our parents didn't have access to any. This is a conversation that I'm so grateful to have as a grown up. Super glad for my young adult kids that they get to kind of be raised in this mental health forward culture, or at least more than it's been. It's not enough. I know that. We're not as far as we need to be, but it's so much further than it's been. And so, with this sort of language now that we have access to, that was a very long intro. Sorry, that was such a long on ramp. Here's my question.
No, it's good. It's good.
So sorry. What would you say constitutes trauma as opposed to maybe this is a struggle? Or is there a difference? Like, what you're a trauma specialist. And so, is there a certain definition around this that's helpful?
Yes. I think the most helpful definition I like to use to differentiate between trauma and a moment that was just painful is that trauma is a past wound that affects how I perceive myself in the future and how I orient myself, rather, how I perceive myself in the present and how I orient myself to the future. Right. So maybe this past moment that I experienced affects like how I show up today. And because of this past thing, I will never fill in the blank. Or I don't trust friends. Why? Because of that past experience. And then you're projecting that into the future. Like, I'm not going to have many friends growing up, or getting older. I'm not going to really have close people around me as I age, right? So it's a past wound that lives in your present and affects how you see the future. That's trauma, right? A painful moment is a moment that is painful, but does not foundationally shift how you see the world. Example, like I might stub my toe, and by the end of the day, I forgot I stubbed my toe. Like, oh, I did stub my toe. Was that today? Was that yesterday? Right? In the moment, it was painful. And maybe it's painful for a couple of days, but I'm able to continue to operate within my set of values regularly and uninterruptedly. So here's what I think the question and the answer that I think that most of us have to face that is not comfortable, and I think it's really revolutionary, is that trauma is deeply personal and deeply contextual, meaning it cannot be defined solely from the outside. And I think that that can be hard for people because for some people it's like, well, I went through that and it was just painful for me. But do you have that person's context? And do you know what's valuable to them as a person? No? Well, then you can't
Mhm.
define whether it's trauma or not.
That's great. Thank you for sort of delineating there, which is helpful as we kind of work to self-assess and then decide what path forward we need for healing. I want to ask you this because I have uh, absolutely done this and experienced it and experienced a lot in my community. I lead kind of a large community of women. And one thing that I see is that when we are uncomfortable with who we are or how we are or our inner wiring, our history, you can fill in kind of the blank there. This a default response that I think women have particularly, but maybe men too, is crafting like a curated version of ourselves, which is inauthentic, but certainly more palatable, or as we see it, as we perceive it. Although this is it's that interrupts any sort of genuine healing cycle, obviously. And so I'd like to hear you talk about that default setting and what you see as the path toward, I guess, authenticity, which requires so much vulnerability. And it's just a trigger for so many people, that sense of like an unguarded way to live in the world. So how do you see that journey from like the shiny penny version of myself
Yeah.
all the way to the real one?
Yeah, that's a good question. One, I think that we do it to be safe. And I think that it's actually useful. Like I think that it is not all bad. It's useful. It kept us safe and it kept us as present as we could be in times where we didn't have the capacity to allow our full selves to be exposed. Right? It's kind of like, when you think about, yeah, when you think about like God didn't just leave Adam and Eve. Like he was like, here, cover yourself up. You're feeling shame. Here's something to cover up. Right. So I don't think it's all bad. But I do think that um, if we learned, so resilience is built through this process of titration, which is like incrementally increasing exposure, incrementally exposing yourself. And I think that sometimes as a culture, we can be like, go from hiding to like absolutely exposing yourself. And that's what authentic is. But the reality is, our authenticity is not safe with everybody, and I think we sense that and we don't know what to do with that reality that I want to be authentic, but I don't know and I don't feel that my authenticity is safe with some people. And so titration is a powerful way to say, here's a little piece of information that's valuable to me, that I'm trusting you with, and giving that person time to treat that information or that part of ourselves with value, and then to continue to entrust them with more. Right. I think that that's the power of communities like yours, is you get to practice in a group of people with a group of people who want to do the same thing. Right. Like a group of people who are all invested in saying, I'm willing to give you a little bit, then I'm willing to give you a little more. Then I'm willing to give you a little more. Right. And like building that over time, because when we give too much in a way that we did not want to, in a way that cost us more than we were willing to pay, it develops resentment. And we're like, I gave you so much, you better show up for me. You better be here for A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But there's a reality that like it is okay for us to take time to build confidence, to be authentic with the right people. And I think the skills that we need to build are really figuring out what is safe to share, what risks am I willing to take, and developing ability to say, how do I know that I can trust somebody without judging that, right? There are some people you will just not feel comfortable around, and that is enough of a reason,
That's good.
you know?
Yep. Yep. That instinct that we're sometimes taught not to trust. That internal like wisdom is also a teacher. So I appreciate you saying that. I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is this very relatable question, which is, why do I keep doing this? Like, why do I keep doing this? Because if it was just mind over matter, if it was a matter of willpower, we would stop doing the thing, whatever the thing is. We would stop responding like that. We would stop triggering whatever. And so I'd like to hear you talk about, and you touched on it, but some of the impetus behind those repetitive behaviors that we actually hate. It's not like we enjoy being that way. It's not like we like responding like that. It's not creating anything good for us. But then also, and I could be just speaking for myself here, but this sometimes easier opt out button which even if I can get down to the bottom of it and trace it back to something in my childhood or earlier in my life, then I still have to overcome the temptation to just be a victim of it, right? Like, well, that happened to me and this isn't my fault anymore. And so if they wouldn't have done that, then I wouldn't be like this, which may not be true, but that is not helpful for like a vibrant future. So I've just put a whole lot on the table right there. So I would just like to hear you pick through that.
Yes. Well, I'm going to challenge that thought. I think it can be helpful. I think that if we don't acknowledge that at one point in one context we were a victim, and if we don't take the time to grieve that appropriately, that grief will find its way out in other places. And I think that a lot of people are deeply sad and deeply enraged at the ways that they have been victimized, but they haven't given it time to sit with it. And I talk about this in my book, that the first step of healing is grieving, acknowledging what you didn't get, but you should have got, right? When we let like the sea of sorrow like drained, and it really is a sea, so it will take a long time. I feel like there's like an initial like, ooh, it's like just coming out, and then over time it's incremental, which is normal and natural. But I think that when we begin to let that sea of sorrow drain, like at the bottom of that is like wisdom and empowerment. And I think that many of us have not been given the space to grieve long enough to know what genuine and internal empowerment feels like. And we keep trying to give ourselves that empowerment from the outside. Like we keep trying to like grasp motivation from somewhere. But like when you have cried enough tears and you're like, one thing I see in my therapy, I'll say this. There are times where my clients have just come to session and just cried and repeated the same thing over and over again for 6 months of just like, and when you think about it, 6 months it's such a small time to grieve a decade of abuse, you know? And without fail, there is one day when they're like, okay, I'm ready to get up. I'm ready to get up. I'm ready to do something about it. And I think many of us have not had like the love of just being allowed to just cry. Just cry and say like, I'm crying for that teenager that was rejected. I'm crying for that young adult that was abused. I am crying for that woman who had to go through the divorce. I am crying for the heavy things I had to carry that nobody saw. I'm crying for how strong I appeared. I am crying for all the things that I had to deal with that no one knows but me. And like, and sadness wants to be seen. It wants to be witnessed, and just being there. And I think that what empowers more people is being able to grieve, because instead of us trying to like pull them up, they'll get up. They will get up, and I love seeing that process when they're just, because there are times where you're like, oh, there's a lot. There's so much sadness here. But when that sadness is gone, at the bottom of that sadness, the person who holds the wound holds the wisdom. So if we lock away that version of us that is deeply wounded and wants to cry for 3 months, then we're also locking away the wisdom of those situations that we need for our present.
Oh, that's good. I identify with that. I um, went through just a devastating trauma like 4 years ago. I lost my marriage, 26 years, and didn't and see it coming. It was a shock, like a blindsidey shock. And I remember it took about 6 months before I could even think a good thought, like before I could. And I am strong, like I lead women. I have every tool in my toolkit in terms of like development and emotional health. Like I know the things. It doesn't matter. Grief just has to run its course. And that's when I realized, ooh, I did not have a high enough tolerance for grief. And I noticed other people don't either. what is wrong with, why do we struggle with this grief process so much? Like, we just want to tidy it up and do it quickly. Like, let's get to the uptick of the story. We love that part.
Yeah. Oh,
Ooh,
yes, man. I think that's the nail on the head, as I think that some of us mask the desire for healing. Rather, we mask wanting to move on. We mask the fear of grief with wanting to move on. Like, we don't actually want to move on. I'm just afraid of what happens if I stay here. And I think that this might be a big statement to make, but I fully believe it. If we allowed people to grieve in the way that they needed to grieve, our entire society would have to change. We would have to slow down. Can you imagine that? Like, I know clients whose parents have passed away and they got 4 weeks off. What? Like, there's a world, and also like grief is a form of vulnerability, and vulnerability is contagious. It's wildfire, right? So if you start to grieve, then man, I start to feel that too. Like, there's a researcher, his name's Yuri Hassan, and he talks about the brain to brain connection. It's called brain neural coupling. He talks about the idea that when someone tells a story honestly and vulnerably with emotive language, the person who hears the story, their brain lights up as if they are experiencing it, right? They're like, on a biological level, we are emotionally connected to each other. And I think many times people push grief aside because they're like, I cannot sit with you in this thing that I have not given myself permission to experience yet.
that's real.
Yeah.
And then if you're the griever, it's so interesting, this story that is so easy to tell ourselves, which is I need to shape up because I'm a burden. Like, I have a timeline that I can be sad about this, and then I'm a bummer to everybody around me. And that's just not really true. And I found that to not be true. I found that to be a story I was telling myself that I did not actually experience, because I could not pull myself out of the grief. Like, I am normally a mind, I can normally just power through a thing. That's my personality. Couldn't do it. Like, everything was too shattered. And so my experience of being at the bottom of the ocean every day for 6 months, which is a long time. It felt like a long time at the time. Um, wasn't at all that it became a burden to everybody else. I noticed more what you said, that it was contagious. I grieved in public because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have any other way to be. And so I grieved in front of my whole community, which is a lot of people. And in 20 years of leading women, we have never had our community galvanized more around anything. Any good thing I've said, any instruction I've given, any shared value we have. It was the grief out loud for that long. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. People, the women were just like, same,
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
everywhere. It's contagious. You're right.
Yes, yeah. And people who grieve publicly are a reminder that humanity is precious. Like, we can kind of just like hurry up and move on. And it's like, I think that like we have as a society, we have lost our taste for people who deny humanity in everything and anything. Like, it's just
We're
not
onto
like,
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
because we're living it, and the stories that used to encourage us are now the same stories that, when we tell ourselves internally, oppress us out of feeling our real feelings, you know? And I think that as a society, we're all like mentally, emotionally growing up into this space that's like, I don't want to hear a story where you went from being like beat up and broke down to being absolutely perfect and unwounded, because it makes me feel like I'm subhuman for deeply grieving something over time, when in reality you are too, but you're just scared to say it out loud.
that's right. That's an isolating story and it doesn't ring true. because we just know. I'm so encouraged. I have a bunch of kids, and most of them are all young adults. They're in their 20s, and they're doing better at this than my age group. Do you notice this? Like they've been handed a different story than the one that we got. And it's so refreshing to see that maybe this isn't a life sentence.
Yep, yep, yep. There's a recalibration. I think that when people now say what you want about social media, I know social media has its downfalls, all the things, but it is a double-edged sword and both sides are sharp. I'll say that. But one thing I love about TikTok is now there can be some like people trying to just like get reactions, but like TikTok showed me that people cared more about what you had to say and who you were as a person than they did about how pretty things looked. Like it was like people are just like, I'm like, this is you, there's no way you look like that when you wake up in the morning, you know? And it was like, man, I feel like every time people really resonated with something, I looked crazy, but I did say something of value. And like that's what mattered to them. And I also think that this generation is feeling, I can go into like the science of this. I can talk about epigenetics and how everything we don't resolve is passed on in our DNA. So we are genetically creating generations that have heavier burdens from the jump, from birth. Because when we don't do the work, someone has to do it. The work still has to be done, right? And I think about how this generation came in with such a low tolerance for the foolery. They're like, no. I feel like the kids were writing poems at 7 years old about freeing oppression, you know, like, and I think that it's just a reminder that like the time for pretending is up. Like humans are getting humans, if they choose, are getting to be more human.
That's encouraging. That's encouraging because back to our earlier point, it's contagious. So the more people that step into that free space, that kind of liberated way of living, the more will. It just that is like a wonderful cascading effect, and begins affecting our relationships and our small groups and our communities. And to me, it feels encouraging, that that's, I think, the direction that we're hopefully heading if we choose it. Which brings me to my next question for you, because I like what you said earlier about trauma, how it's not necessarily what happened to you, but what it created in you and how it affected you. So thus, in any healing journey, sometimes our biggest obstacle is ourself. It's that inner voice that wants to truncate the process. It wants to slow it down. It wants to call it into question. It wants to discredit it. Often, my mean inner voice wants to blame me. I want to take, oh, what did I do wrong to cause this to be? How could I have acted differently to have changed this outcome? And so I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about self-talk and what some of those internal messages should be challenged, and what should we begin to replace them with to start that journey like back up out of the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, well, I will say it is much longer than what I'm going to present here in a real clinical relationship. But like I would even challenge you saying like my critical inner voice, because I oftentimes try to remind my clients like you absorb the sounds and the voices and the words and the values of the people that you spent the most time around. Right? If I hear a Beyonce song, in my head, I don't hear my voice singing a Beyonce song. I hear Beyonce's voice singing a Beyonce song, right? I can hear all the runs. I can't do the runs in real life, but I can hear all the details. I can hear the layers of the song, all the things. And so something I often ask my clients is, whose voice is that? Whose voice did you absorb? Whose voice in your life would talk to you like that? Whose voice like in your life would blame you for your own pain? Whose voice is that? And I think that it's a great place to differentiate, because just because it's something that plays in our mind doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean it's accurate. It just means we heard it before somewhere else. That's it. right? Like there are songs that like someone can turn on the radio. I had no clue I knew all the words to Shania Twain's song. I feel like a woman. Bow, bow. Had no clue. Had no clue. But what's hilarious is my sister was like, "Oh, we used to listen to that all the time." And I was like, "Really?" Had no clue. Didn't remember. But the only
But
way
there it was.
yes,
Hmm.
stored. Why? Because I heard it before. Because I love Shania Twain. Now I do love Shania Twain, right? But like if if I had chosen to learn that song, that's one thing, but I didn't. It was just simply something I was around and something that I absorbed. And so, like, the question I ask my clients is, whose voices did you absorb? And it could be many voices of many people, right? So, like, when you say this is your fault, you should have known, who in your life would have said that to you out loud,
Good. I'm
right?
writing it down right now.
Yes, do it, do
I
it.
really am writing it down. Like, I don't, this needs some time. This needs some
Yeah,
thought.
absolutely.
Um,
And I think we combat the internal voices with an external voice. A good friend and therapist, Mina B, once said, you need to talk out loud to yourself so sometimes you can hear your discrepancies, right? Because the discrepancies will help you realize where things are misaligned. And where things are misaligned, there's usually something external coming in, right? Because I mean, and I've said this before on my social media, I do not know many people, I do not know many women who actually have low self-esteem. I know a lot of women who had to pretend to have low self-esteem to stay connected to the people they loved.
Yikes. Well,
So there's a difference when you're not talking down on yourself because you believe that. You're talking down on yourself because you learned that that's what would make that person comfortable being around you. And you desperately wanted connection, right? You were absorbing the voices and the values of the people around you. And so for the listeners, I think that a great first step is like, what are the recurring thoughts I have about myself when something goes wrong, when I make a mistake, when I don't get what I want? And whose voice would say that to me, would say to me out loud what I say to myself in silence?
I'm writing. This is what I'm having right now is the therapy session. Sorry. I
Yes.
know you thought you were coming on a podcast, but
We
uh,
can make it both. We can make it both.
uh,
Yeah, and
that's good.
I think that a lot of us are we're learning to parse out, and parsing out happens when we slow down. Where we're learning to say like, this keeps showing up, but I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I don't even necessarily believe it, but I just keep saying it to myself,
Yeah. I'd
and
like to hear you talk more about that because on your socials, I love how one of your recurring themes is pace and the speed at which I guess we're doing everything, frankly. And you have this clarion call that is pretty consistent, like everybody slow the F down. And I'm drawn to it. I'm drawn to it because this is part and parcel with healing and with mental wellness. And I think I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about what you see and what you would rather see, frankly.
yes. I see people who, including myself, so don't even, I'm not doing a them thing. I'm talking about a us thing. I see us rushing. I see us being lured into a pace of life that's not sustainable for healing or humanity. Like it is not sustainable to live like, and I think we deep down at our core, we know that. We know this is not sustainable. Like I cannot have peace at this pace. I cannot have joy at this pace. I can't have connection at this pace. I can't even change the like when you think about a car who's about to turn, what's the first thing they say to you when you're about to make a turn? Slow down. If you are trying to make like people don't even have the pace and the space to shift because they're living life so fast that like every time they try to make a slight move, they crash and burn, And I think that I'm just realizing like, oh, my humanity is good. God created it good. And if I believed I was good for just existing as I am, how would I treat myself? The world is not going to teach me as a person. The world's not going to teach me as a woman. The world's not going to teach me as a Black woman. The world's not going to teach me as a mother how to love myself well. That is my responsibility, and a responsibility that I gratefully get to share with my community and with my husband. But like learning like what do I actually need? A question I ask myself and ask my clients is, if there are no consequences for the choices that you make, what choices would you make to live a better life right now?
Oh, that's such a fun question.
Yeah.
And also illuminating. I bet almost nobody would say, oh, I wouldn't change a thing. Nobody. Yeah. Yeah. This pace is unsustainable and we know it. And the rest of the world lives different. And it's really interesting to like peek over our borders and look around the world where it just more wisdom exists than in the United States at every strata and level. And just to see like, oh, this in some ways is uniquely American. And it's rewarded behavior. So, I mean, there's a reason we do it. We get our snaps for it. I mean, our culture is going to be like, burn yourself into the ground. We're here for it. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
productivity.
Uh-huh. Never missed a day at school, get an award. And it's like maybe
That's
your kid
right.
needed a mental health day.
God, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I want to just wrap it up here with you because I think one reason why so many people are drawn to you, why your influence is just growing and growing and growing, like on everywhere that you are lending leadership, is this you're something of you're a cheerleader. You're like you're an enthusiast for people. And you're like, I'm here for you. You have this, you can do this. You are valuable. Like you are beautiful. You've got it already. Like it's not, you own it. You were born with it is so, it's comforting. Like it's just comforting. It's not a message we necessarily see everywhere. And so, um, I wonder if this is who you just are. Is this something you've developed in yourself? Have you become the voice in your own heart that you always wanted? Like, it's a wonderful way to lead, and it's
Wow.
really moving.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. I think, if I'm being honest, I think it's who I've always been, but I think it's also who I'm allowing myself to become again. Because I feel like my own trauma made me feel like the safer thing was to be hard-hearted and to be judgmental and to look at other people and find value in competition and find value and I'm better than, or, like comparison. I think that um, I was the quick relief of not feeling worse than other people for a long time lured me into existing in a way that, to be honest, I didn't feel proud of. I didn't feel like was me. And so I feel like the last couple of years has been my time to be like, this is who I am. This is who I'm gonna be. And it's easy for me to cheer people on because I have my own stuff, but for the most part, that's how I talk to myself. And that's how I talk to, my husband and my kids, because honestly, it's how God talks to me.
Yeah,
And I love that. So
I do too. Um, I have one last question for you, but before I get to it, could you just tell my community, because this is like a really powerful 45-minute conversation. You have really put some thoughts in my brain that I'm going to go spend some time with today. And I know for sure my community is going to want to know more from you and hear more from you and put themselves under your leadership. So can you just talk real quickly? Where can people find you? Where can they find your amazing book on all the things?
yes, absolutely. So you can find me on Facebook. Well, never mind, not on Facebook. I just talk to my family on there. You can find me on Instagram, on TikTok. on X, at Kobe Campbell underscore, so KOBECAMPBELL underscore. And you can find my book, Why Am I Like This? How to Break Cycles, Heal from Trauma, and Restore Your Faith. Everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, all the places. And I love that book. I love that book so much. It is like my third child. So I really pray that it blesses whoever reads it.
Same. I know exactly what you mean. And everybody listening, like we scratched the surface. If you want more, it's in that book. So like it digs into all these thoughts and all these questions and ideas. And so that is a wonderful place to start. Okay, last question. I ask everybody this on every show, and you can answer this however you want. It can be absurd. It can be like earnest, whatever you want. We literally have we have every kind of answer on this. But anyway, I borrowed this question from a priest that I love. And she asks, what is saving your life right now?
Poetry.
Oh, tell
Writing
me more.
poetry. I
Mm,
used to write poetry a ton. I feel like poetry used to be my thing. Like, I used to do competitions, all stuff, and like just realizing that like I feel closest to God in creativity and in play. And I was like, instead of like just journaling how pissed off I am, maybe I can like write a poem. And I've been like, oh, I love this. I enjoy this. It's fun. So that's been saving my life. That and my
mm.
Nespresso.
Oh, say less. Say less.
My Nespresso girl. Them pods are saving
So,
my life.
look, that'll literally get me on a bed in the morning.
Uh-huh.
I will
Uh-huh.
think
Same.
I could have coffee in
Yep.
5 minutes as
Yep.
soon as my feet hit the floor, and that's enough
Yes.
motivation to pull my ass
Absolutely.
right out of it.
Yep. I feel that.
I love that. Real quick, do you have another favorite poet that you love to read or that you love to have in your feed even? I know that's so put on the spot. Anytime somebody asks me some book I love, I can't think of a book I've ever read in my whole life.
I know. I'm like, what? Like,
Uh-huh.
I don't have a bookshelf behind me.
Uh-huh.
Another poet, I really love Maya Angelou. I really, really love her work. I also, Mikkel C. Clark. I don't know. He's on Instagram, Michelle. And he is so poignant with taking such complicated emotions and making them into really simple phrases that you read it and you're like, "Ah, someone gets it, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there it
I
is.
love his work.
Okay, awesome. We need our poets. We need
Yes,
our
we do.
poets.
We do.
We need our
Yes.
poets and our artists and our therapists, and together, like we can find beauty again. I know it.
Yes.
Thank you so
Yes.
much for being on today. I
Thank
am
you.
so glad I had this morning with you. I really am. I am thankful for your wisdom. Thank you for the labor that this is to bring this to bear. This is, you deal in people's trauma. It's hard and it's heavy, and you choose it. And I recognize that heavy emotional lift. And thank you, because it serves more than your clients, it serves the rest of us too. And so I am excited for my community to know you
Thank you so
and to
much. I
learn from you.
appreciate that.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
All right, you guys. Lots in there. Lots in there. This for me is going to be a re-listen for sure. Just a reminder, if you ever want to watch any of these interviews, you can go over to my YouTube channel. We visually record all of these too, so you can watch our conversation and see Kobe. And sometimes, I mean, that's how I experience all of our podcasts. So to me, that's my preferred way. That is always a resource for you if you'd love to consume this particular episode that way. Um, okay, this is a good one to share, guys. This one might be one to put in a few text threads to your favorite people. I love raising our kids like this too. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. If you haven't already, you guys. Oh, by the way, you can go to jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab and get everything here. I'll have it in one place. This episode and the show notes, and then all of the handles to Kobe's social, the link to her book, just everything. You can find it in one spot. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Just subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll never miss an episode. It'll just come right to you week in and week out. I hope you are enjoying the season as much as I am. And I'm so delighted to have introduced you to Kobe if you didn't already know her. So, all right, you guys, we sure love you. See you next week.